Hello everyone and welcome back to the X-Ring. I hope you're doing well today. Guys, today's video is going to be about bases, rings, unimounts, cantilevers, and what you need to know about them. So if you're interested, definitely stick around. All right guys, so I've actually been trying to get this video out for a little while because I get a lot of emails with regards to someone taking their favorite hunting rifle and being able to shoot at distance. And knowing everything about bases, rings, and unimounts and all of that, especially with the MOAs and the taper, can really help you make an informed decision. So guys, after a lifetime of shooting and competing, doing everything from winning regional, state, and national level championships, I've learned along the way what works and what doesn't work for most of my setups. What we're gonna do is we're gonna look at not only Rimfire, but centerfire, and then also like centerfire ARs, and talk about some of the different mount systems and some of my favorites. So let's go ahead and get started. Today is we are going to bring out the whiteboard of knowledge, and there's a couple of things we need to understand before we can basically make heads or tails out of it. First and foremost is how a scope actually works. Now I know most of you guys might know this, some of you guys don't, but basically with your scope, you guys look through the scope, and if everything being equal and the erector tube is straight, more on that in just a minute, you're going to be looking in a straight line. Now, if this is your muzzle and this is the bullet, the minute that bullet exits the barrel, it is going to continue on a downward path because it's being affected by gravity, it is losing velocity, and it will slowly fall to the earth. Now, I think you guys would agree that these two lines here are never going to intersect, okay? They're never going to intersect. And you say, well, how is that possible? I mean, we do make them intersect, and yes, we do, but the way we do that is by angling our vision downwards so that it crosses the trajectory of the bullet, okay? In simple terms, that's exactly what's happening. So what we need to think about is how this scope internal works. So this is in an exploded view of the actual turret itself, and this is the main tube, whether it's 1 inch or 30 millimeters, the 34, 35, 36, doesn't matter. But inside of this tube, you actually have another tube that is, and I'm not an artist and I don't claim to be, this is called an erector tube, okay? Now this erector tube, whenever you start to dial on your turret, it is either going to push down or it's going to raise it up. And then for your windage, there's actually another one that's putting side force on this. This is why a lot of times on the bottom of scopes you're going to see a little dongle or this little thing that's sticking out. I'll show you a picture of that. All manufacturers are different and not everyone has that. It is a lot harder to make a scope without that feature on it, but typically you're going to find that in the higher end scopes where you don't have something protruding on the side. So the thing is you have a couple things to consider before you start buying bases or mounts or rings or anything like that. And that is, number one, what is the distance that you're trying to shoot? Number two, what is the actual total elevation available to you in that scope? And number three is going to be the caliber. Those are three big things to take into consideration when you're trying to choose that perfect base, ring, cantilever, mount combo. Okay, because you have a limited amount of travel. I've written some notes here, but let's say like on a Zeiss, like a 425, you have a total of 160 minutes of angle available to you. Now, some of you guys might say, well, I'm mil rads. Well, that's like 46 mil radians. It doesn't matter the difference between the two. It is just angular measurement. And what we're talking about is the angle that is available to you from top to bottom through this tube from the erector going up and down. Now, let's just make it easy, for example. So like on a Zeiss 636, you've got 110 total minutes. Now that means that you have 110 total minutes available to you for up and down travel, the internal adjustment of that scope. But remember, if we're looking straight through this scope, these two are never going to intersect. We're going to have to actually push down on this erector tube so that our line of sight actually crosses that trajectory of that bullet. Now that's usually going to be, you've got a near zero and a far zero, but that's essentially what we have to do, is we have to cross the trajectory of that bullet with our line of sight. So if you've got 110, that's the total. So if you take half of that, now you're looking at 55 and 55. Okay, I'm trying to do this sideways, but still keep it in there. But remember, we've got to intersect. So let's say you have to push this tube down more to, let's say, 60. That's going to leave you remaining from the 110 that's available. You're going to have, what is that, 50 on the bottom side. Okay, so you've got 50 minutes available to you to be able to dial. You say, well, why is this important? Well, it's important because every scope is different. So if you look like at Arkin, some of the models only have, like, let's say 50 minutes of adjustment, or any of the manufacturers. It doesn't matter. It is your job to know how much travel, internal adjustment you have for that actual scope. Now, that information that I just gave you is available on all the manufacturers' websites. They're going to tell you how much internal adjustment travel they actually have. So in the case of these rifles here, most of these are my competition setups, but I do have one that is, we're going to use it as an example. That is going to be this Tikka. This is a T3X varmint, and it's in 6.5 Creedmoor. And I still got owe you guys a review on this. It is topped off with the Arkin, the EP5, the Gen 2, the 7-35 by 56. And it's something that would work for not only hunting, but also some light long range application, maybe even ELR application. So a lot of these emails are generated by people that say, hey, I want to be able to shoot out a mile. Well, do you have enough taper on your base? Do you have enough adjustment to be able to dial out that far? Now, there are some exceptions to the rule. If you have a reticle within that scope, you might be able to dial maximum and then be able to hold the remainder in the reticle, okay? So that's something you need to consider. Now, I will tell you from the factory, this Tikka T3X comes with a 0 MOA base. It doesn't matter if it comes with a 0 or a 20 or a 30, as long as you know what the total MOAs are on that base system itself and how far you're trying to actually reach out. So you can simply take this 0 MOA base, and if I think about this Arkin, this EP5 on here, I have about 120 minutes available to me. I should be able to reach out to about 1,300 yards or so. And you say, well, how did you come up with that number? Well, it's actually pretty simple. What you do is you just run your ballistic calculator, you look and see how much elevation you have. Now, all of these rifles are zeroed at 100 yards, and so the 0 that you see on here is actually going to be the 100-yard 0. So if I just want to dial, the furthest I can dial on this, there's 10 mils. I can dial out to 14.5 mils. So all you would do is you would go to your ballistic calculator and see how far 14 mils would get you. I can tell you it will not get you to a mile. All right, in order to get to a mile with a 6.5 Creedmoor, depending on the velocity, you're going to be somewhere between 24 to about 26 mils. Well, we're quite a ways short. I mean, we're another 10 to 12 mils short of being able to dial that. So if you've got reticle, you can hold in it, but remember, the further you get away from the center of a scope, the less clear it is. Your best optical clarity in a scope is going to be within the center portion of those lenses, not on the edges. Edge to edge clarity is something that people look at, because when you get into the lower end scopes, you'll be able to see on the edges, you'll have a little bit of distortion. You might have more chromatic aberration, but typically the center is where the manufacturers really focus the most on. It really depends on the manufacturer themselves. So if I go out there with the intention of being able to shoot the mile day with this rifle just by dialing, it's not going to happen. But there's ways we can alleviate that. What we can do is we can put a different base on there. Okay, so you have tapered bases. This is an example of, I think this is an AAC. This is a 20-minute of angle base. So if you think about the 0 base, this is parallel with the receiver, but if we wanted to tilt this more downwards, that is going to give us more adjustment to be able to dial out further. This is a 60 mil ELR mount system. And so basically, if I were to mount this onto this rifle, as I start to turn this wheel, okay, there's 10 mils, there's 20 mils, there's 30 mils, 40, 50, and we're getting to 60 right there. What do you see? You see how much it's tilted this base towards the barrel itself? So if you do the math on 20 MOAs, that's going to get you somewhere, I don't know, somewhere around 6 mils or so, something like that. I'm just guessing. But it's going to add another 6 to that 14 that we already dialed in, that 14.5. So I'm going to be somewhere around 20. Well, guess what? I'm still going to be shy if I want to dial that precisely. I'm still going to have to hold the remainder within the reticle, okay? These are actually pretty simple to install. I'm going to give you guys some tips and tricks along the way. Whenever you go to replace a rail, and there's other ways to do it. Guys, you don't have to replace this rail. What we could do is we could do it on the mount system itself, and I'll talk more about that in just a minute. But let's say you wanted that base system to actually have taper to it. Well, if we wanted to replace it, what we want to do is take the old one off or purchase a new one. And then what you want to do is make sure that your screws are clean, the receiver's clean, use alcohol, use degreaser, whatever, but make sure that's nice and clean. The next thing you want to do is you want to make sure that you have a torque wrench available, okay? Because you can strip these out very easily depending on what the screw size is. And so having a torque wrench helps quite a bit. Because this is something you're not changing quite often, I always highly recommend that you use some type of Loctite, whether that's blue or purple. That's entirely up to you. But remember, if you use Loctite on any thread for tension, it's not technically torque, it's tension, you want to reduce the recommended torque by about 20%. The range is actually from about 15% to 30% when you're using Loctite because it serves as a lubricant as well. And so you want to reduce it, as a rule of thumb, about 20%. So if it calls for 20 and you're using Loctite, you might want to back that off by about 20% so that you get that torque right and don't end up stripping your screws. The next thing you need to consider is whether or not you want rings or if you want a unimount system, okay? Now, there is nothing wrong with rings, okay? But rings only get you what you originally have. So there are some exceptions to the rule. Burris had some signature rings or some European manufacturer rings that have inserts that have shims that can give you adjustable minutes of angle so that you can add that. But generally speaking, most rings or ring setups will not add to your overall MOAs or helping you with that to be able to dial more. So whether you're using, ultralight rings or anything like that, that's entirely up to you, but you're also limited on what you can attach to that. So if you wanted to use this rifle, you could shoot this in a PRS match. I would highly discourage that, but you could do it. Maybe in a hunter match or something, this would be perfect. But when you get into competition shooting, you want to be able to add things like data cards, things like levels. This has a level in it, but then you wouldn't have a data card. Now you could run one on an armband, but if you wanted to attach it to the rifle so that your vision's not being taken away from the actual scope while you're on the rifle, you might want to look at a way to be able to attach things. This is where different manufacturers of rings come into play, because some manufacturers like Spur has scope rings. They're very, very expensive, but you can attach things like data cards or Picatinny rails or even electronic levels like your LRA to those. Okay, so it will help, but it's not helping your overall MOA. So if I wanted to add 20 minutes, I could do it in the base itself or maybe 30. Now, before we go any further, let's talk about Rimfire. So on Rimfire, this is the Venus Pro. Guys, this has 20 minutes of angle built into the base rail. It's already starting off with 20, so that's helping me out because this is a different caliber. It falls much quicker. And if you're doing ELR 22 or NRL 22X, like with PRS, you might be shooting out to distances of 400 yards. Guys, that is further than you're probably ever going to deal. That's the equivalent of like dialing out to a mile with your centerfire rifle. So you're going to be working the turrets quite a bit, so you do want a lot of travel. Back in the day when Voodoo and all these other companies first started, you could get as an option a 20-minute of angle rail or even a 30. I think the Ruger RPR might actually come with a 30, and that helps quite a bit. Now, there is a disadvantage of having too much. Like, let's say I did a total of, I've got 20 here and I've got 40 on this mount system. Well, that's 60. Well, the problem with 60 is I'm probably not going to be able to get a 0 at 50 yards. I might have to move that 0 out further, and I don't really want to do that on a rimfire. So what you're seeing now, the trend is, as for a rimfire, for ELR, you want a minimum of 30 to about 40 MOAs. That's a good sweet spot. This actually has 40 on it because I have 20 in the rail and 20 in the mount. So that's what it adds to it by being able to go from a ring system to a mount system like this. Not only do I have it in the rail, but I also have it in the top, and whatever that cumulative number is what's going to help you for your internal adjustment for travel to be able to reach out further. So it's very important to make sure you know which combination you're looking for. I would always recommend 40, but remember, it is also going to be dependent upon the scope itself. 40 might be too much for a scope that doesn't have a lot of internal adjustment. So please keep that in mind. Now, if we're trying to build out a hunting rig, something as simple as a set of rings would be fine, okay? Remember, it's not going to add to the overall. So in the case of this Tikka, with this scope on here, by my calculations with Ballistic app, I could reach out to about 1,300 yards. Well, nobody really hunts at 1,300 yards. It wouldn't be ethical because you probably don't have enough energy to take down that animal ethically. But for most shots, guys, I would have no problem going out and doing a 1,000-yard day with this setup with that 0 MOA base. However, if I was going to try to shoot the mile with it, then I might need to add more, maybe about 30 minutes, whether I do that in the rail or if I do it with a mount. So let's say this is 20 and this is another 20. Now we've added 40 to it, just like we did on the Rimfire, but we would be able to reach out to a mile by doweling, more than likely. Remember, it is going to be caliber specific as well. But now we get into another topic, and that is going to be quick releases. I want to talk about that for just a moment. There is nothing wrong with quick release mounts. They've gotten really great. They've gotten very repeatable, very durable, but I typically don't run any type of quick release optics mount. Now, as a content creator, I usually keep a set around to be able to move it from one to another. If I'm doing comparisons or whatnot, I need to use the same optic. But for real world application, there really, for me, isn't a reason to use quick release. There is an application for it. You know, American Defense Manufacturing, ADM, makes a great set of mounts. And for maybe, let's say, a duty rifle, you want something that you can take off quickly so that you could switch it over to a dot, or if you wanted to be able to go to your backup irons or whatever. You know, that's really not so much the case anymore because guys are running offset 45s so that you do have a backup system within that low power variable optic or whatever it is you have. But now we need to talk about AR setups. So with an AR setup, you don't want to use a straight like this, because guys, think about it. This is just basically a set of rings in a unimount system that is a lot more rigid because it's machined out of one solid block. But when you get into an AR, if you try to put this on there, what's going to end up happening is you're going to end up trying to bridge the upper receiver and the handguard mount area to get that scope far enough forwards. It's just the way that it works on the length of pull. So let's go ahead and take a look at my DMR setup. All right, so for those of you that have been following the channel for a while, you know, I had the DMR championships out at Clinton House. It was about 3 weeks ago or so. This was the exact rifle I was running. One of the things you're going to notice on there is I was actually running the Area 419, the tactical mount here, but it is a cantilever style. So the rings are a little bit forwards, just kind of like you would see in this. It is a cantilever that gets this scope more forwards or more towards the muzzle. But the mount system is further back into this area so that I can mount onto the upper receiver. If I were to try to use this MPA without a cantilever system on it, and I put it on here, I would actually be bridging the front handguard. And you never want to attach, I'm not saying you can't, but you never want to attach to the front handguard on an AR for a precision type setup. If it's something where you just need a dot and you know you're shooting within 300 meters or so, it's not that big of a deal. You can put stuff on there, things like PEX and whatnot, but you're starting to see that more and more people, especially when those that are running the Vortex, like the 4000s, or if you're running Wilcox, you'll run it on a bridge here so you can mount it to here that's rigid instead of something that can flex like your handguard. So this is where cantilevers come into play. You want to use a cantilever on almost all your AR setups. You don't have to, but it is preferred. You can also run a cantilever on your bolt gun if you so choose. There's nothing that says you can't, and it's not going to hurt you. But once again, make sure that you have the right taper, because we've got 0 MOAs built into this upper receiver. And if I wanted to be able to reach out further, because this is DMR application, I can do that because this is actually a 20 MOA cantilever. So that's already given me the 20 minutes. Regardless of what optic I'm running, I'm already adding that 20 minutes to that system to help me reach out further. Ironically, this Night Force has a lot of internal adjustment, a decent amount anyway. So if I've got 100 yard 0, the max I can dial with this is there's 10 mils, 12, 13, 14. And you're like, well, that's not far. And it really isn't for this caliber. 14 mils will get me out to 1,000 yards. But if I wanted to, let's say, be stupid and try to, you know, shoot the mile target with this 6 Max, which is doable. We've done it with a 5.56. With this actual scope, the reticle gives me another 38 mils. That's a lot. And so I could, in fact, dial max, hold the remainder in the reticle as long as I can see it well enough, because on a first focal, remember, those numbers get very, very tiny, but it will work. Guys, I have been running everything from spurs to MPAs in the past, and here recently, Area 419 released their set of tactical basis mount systems, and it is by far the best system I've ever run. Now, not everyone needs to hang the kitchen sink off of their rifle, but on this setup here, I want to be able to have a level. You guys can see that we have an LRA send it on here. We have a mount perch that is sold by Area 419 so that I could actually have my level, so that I've got it in a nice place. I can still reach all my controls. I have my data card, whether I'm going to do it up, down, whatever, I can see that, but it's in this really nice compact package. If I wanted to run a Wilcox, I could put it on the bridge on the top, and if I wanted to run an offset 45, I could do that here, or even an offset 35. That's one thing I will give kudos to Area 419 for, is that they really think out their products. Some people don't like 45, some people like 35s, and sometimes it depends on the actual red dot you're using for that clearance. And that is for applications like if you're doing 3-gun or something like that, where if you had close targets, I could still leave my magnification in my scope and just have that one set for, let's say, a 200-yard zero or a 50-yard zero, and anything that was close, I could engage those as well. So you need to think about that whole platform. Guys, Area 419 just did a series of videos about their bases, and this is an Area 419 commercial, but I like to keep you guys informed of what I use and what I've found to be the best. And right now on the market, their price point, somewhere around $300 or so. If you use X-Ring in the coupon code no hyphen, I think it gets you another 10% off. And I get no kickback from that, but that's something that would help you. Well, when you compare that to the price of a spur, that can go from $400 to about $550, and then you still got to add all these accessories, which do cost a little bit more depending on your needs, it can really add up to a $600 mount system pretty darn quickly. So that's something to think about. The other thing is I do want to mention that Arkin is a supporter of the channel now. If you're looking for anything Arkin, you can put X-Ring in the coupon code. Between now and Christmas, I think they're doing like 25% off. If you use that coupon code, it actually helps the channel out. I do get a small percentage of that from the sale, and it does help the channel out. But I did want to do this video for you guys because it's a lot to think about whenever you are setting up your rifle for whatever application, to make sure you can actually dial out as far as you need to. And taking a closer look at the Accuracy International, I wanted to set this up where it was lighter weight, so that's why it has the carbon barrel in it right now. It has the Zeiss to 636, but I have a spirit level for that Area 419 mount. It's not a cantilever, and then I also have my data card holder. This has a 0 taper to it because I have 20 minutes built into the base itself. So like I said, you just got to do some due diligence, but I wanted you guys to understand what, why, and where you need to have certain mounts on certain rifles and their applications. Guys, I hope you're doing well. I'll try to get you some more videos out. Appreciate all the new subscribers, appreciate all my Patreons, and I hope you guys have a great week. We'll talk to you next week. See you on the next one. Or if the rifle is capable of that. So remember, this isn't, whoa, that was close. Oh, shoot. And that is how you dent a set of rings. Leave us remaining with what, 100, with